deceit. Telling the truth is a revolutionary act. It's the David Knight Show.
As the clock strikes 13, it's Tuesday, the 20th of January, year of our Lord 2026. Well, overnight we had more tantrums about the Nobel Peace Prize, about Greenland. I guess Trump doesn't care. In the letter that he sent to them over the weekend, he said, I don't really care about peace anymore, to paraphrase what he had to say. Could we say that he is bored of peace? Or is it about the peace board? He's got a new organization. He says it's about Gaza, but many other people say it's about much, much more. And some of them have pushed back against this. France pushed back against it. So overnight, Trump had another tariff tantrum, 200% tariffs on France. Well, I wonder if the Peace Board will have a prize. It cost $1 billion to get into his private club there. We'll be talking about that. And notice there's a trend here with Trump. He sees evil organizations like the Federal Reserve and the UN, and instead of trying to end them, he decides that he's going to take them over and run them as a one-man show. And so maybe the prize he's going to win is Antichrist there, the man of sin. He's got a long list of them, doesn't he? And we're going to take a look at Don Lemon. Don Lemon finally went to church, but for all the wrong reasons. We'll be right back. Yeah, let's talk a little bit about what Trump said. First of all, the letter that he wrote to Norway. So he says, in this very early yesterday, news began to break about Trump's letter to Norway over the country's failure to award him the Nobel Peace Prize. It was so unhinged and so illiterate. Many people didn't believe it was real. And then the White House confirmed, yes, it is real. And the ambassadors of the other countries said, yes, it is real. Confirmation came soon after people were questioning, I don't think this is real. In a letter addressed to Norwegian Prime Minister Støre, Trump explained that he no longer feels obligated to focus exclusively on peace, while repeating his intent for control over Greenland. He laid out that the Nobel might turn into no Greenland, no Nobel Prize for him might turn into no Greenland for Europe. There you go, tit for tat. As a matter of fact, he writes, this is what he did. And this is why people didn't believe it was real at the very beginning. Dear Jonas, that's the first name of the Prime Minister of Norway, he says, since your country decided not to give me a Nobel Peace Prize for stopping 8 wars plus, I no longer feel an obligation to think purely of peace, although it will always be dominant, but can now think about what is good and proper for the United States. Again, it was something like this. No. This is baby pointing to Greenland, and the mom says no, and he throws a temper tantrum, and he points at it again here. No. That's basically it, or more like this, actually. Precious. Yeah, a little bit more, a little bit more violence than the toddler that's there. As for whether Trump indeed wrote it, concerning the bombastic letter's authenticity, Forbes said that letter has been forwarded by the National Security Council staff to multiple European ambassadors in Washington. And the message has been reproduced as well. But they're sending it to all these people. It was an official letter. The president also in the letter takes the opportunity to bash Denmark, saying it cannot protect Greenland from Russia or China. And again, questioned its legal rights to Greenland. He said there's no written documents. It's only that a boat landed there hundreds of years ago. Wait a minute, isn't that our story? This guy is an idiot. He's an idiot. He's overturning all of the standards. Look, however we got here, let's just leave the borders where they are so we can have some peace, okay? It's these geopolitical Machiavellian princes that are constantly starting wars because they need to move the lines on the map. I'm not willing to pay or die for that. Are you? I hope not. So he said, well, we had boats landing there also. Well, hours later, Norway issued a full formal response. Statement from the Prime Minister's store said, I can confirm that this is a text message that I received yesterday afternoon from Trump. It came in response to a short text message to me from me to Trump sent earlier the same day on behalf of myself and the President of Finland. In our message to Trump, we conveyed our appreciation, our opposition to his announced tariff increases against Norway, Finland, and select other countries. We pointed to the need to de-escalate, and we proposed a telephone conversation between Trump, Stubb, and myself on the same day. And instead, Trump sends this thing back saying, well, I don't feel like I need to talk about peace anymore. I'm bored of this peace stuff. You didn't give me a prize, so you can't have Greenland. I'm going to take Greenland in retaliation. He says in response, Trump came shortly after the message was sent. It was his decision to share the message with other NATO leaders. Again, he didn't just send it to the people that were affected. He didn't just send it to the Prime Minister there of Norway. He sent it to everybody. He says, and as regards the Nobel Peace Prize, I have clearly explained, including to President Trump, what is well known, and that is that the prize is awarded by an independent Nobel committee and not by the Norwegian government. Trump doesn't understand that. This is the guy who wants to rule the world, and he doesn't even bother with those details. All he knows is that he wants his prize. Somebody get him a box of Cracker Jacks. Norway's Prime Minister's store has since explained the letter came in response to the joint message they sent earlier with Trump with the Finnish president, rejecting the White House plans to impose higher tariffs on Scandinavian countries. We pointed out the need to de-escalate the exchange, requested a phone call, and this is what he sent. And there's a cartoon there, a meme rather. Yeah, that's good. This is a 1950s mom, and scroll down, you can see Trump is sitting there, and she says, no, you can't have Greenland. You haven't finished your Venezuela yet. He is a child. Let me tell you, when he sends a massive bunch of troops to Greenland, which he has the legal authority to do because there's a treaty there. We've already got bases there. I think that's the way it's going to happen. When he does that, I think the headline should be, the ego has landed, because that's what this is all about. So again, he says he no longer feels an obligation to think purely of peace. And yet he's starting his so-called peace board that is there. Again, when you look at the absurdity of the argument from the Trump administration, shame on all these people who are there. The whole lot of them, whether it's Stephen Miller, Marco Rubio, Pete Hegseth, Caroline Leavitt, all of them, they have blown all their credibility for all time because they just follow this guy as a bunch of sycophants. When you look at the argument that's being put out, well, we need to have it for national security. If that were true, you've already got bases, you've already got treaties, first of all. Secondly, it shouldn't be a threat at all for other NATO countries. If you say that there is a threat from Russia and China, which there isn't, by the way, but if you say that there's a threat from Russia or China, if you want to play the domino theory, if you want to play the Cold War, yeah, how about that? I guess that's the new headline we could do. Cold War goes Arctic. A real Cold War. Just like the drug war goes to a real war, now we've got the Cold War actually going to the Arctic. Anyway, if you want to say that's a threat, then you should welcome the fact that all these countries want to send military there, except that they're putting the military there to stop the threat from you, not the threat from Russia, not the threat from China. They're not threatening to take over Greenland. It's you, pal. Look in the mirror, Trump. Article 5 of NATO says that any such attack on Greenland by a nation such as Russia or China would constitute an attack on all the other member states. And they would all be obligated to protect the U.S., Canada, all of them. So how does this change anything? The national security nonsense that he's putting out there, even if what he's saying is true, and I don't believe that it is, even if that were true, it doesn't justify or even explain why he would want to take over Greenland. Again, it's a NATO country, and when these other countries put their military there, it is to stop the threat from him. not from anybody else. So as one person said, Trump rightfully bashed the mainstream media for making stuff up all the time. Then Trump became president, and he's making stuff up all the time. That's Chris Rossini who said that. He's absolutely right. So again, explain to him yet again that the Norwegian government plays no role in who gets the prize. But of course, the person who got the prize was Trump. And other people put this clip together, what he had to say about trannies stealing awards from women.
The United States will not let men steal trophies from women.
Yesterday, you accepted Maria Machado's Nobel Prize medal. What do you intend to do with it, and why would you want someone else's Nobel Prize?
Well, she offered it to me. I thought it was very nice. She said, you know, you've ended 8 wars, and nobody deserves this prize more than in history. The United States will not let men steal trophies from women.
Yeah, well, he's, I guess, kind of a tranny when it comes to awards, isn't he? He's trans peace. He identifies as somebody who's all about peace, and yet he's exactly the opposite. So his decision to accept the award is ironic, considering how he and his MAGA acolytes have mocked participation trophies as symbols of the declining American culture that they stand against. By choosing to take the Nobel Peace Prize from Machado, he has effectively received his very own participation trophy. And we've also seen what Machado is as well. She's going to cave to this. I'm so sick and tired of seeing people bow the knee to this childish, brutish tyranny of Trump. On every issue, they do it. And the media does it as well. Even some of the media that doesn't like Trump is now so intimidated by him that they bow the knee to him. Shame on them. Well, people are going even further than this, especially in other countries. I said, this is what the 25th Amendment is for. You know, when people do the kinds of things Trump has done in the last 24, 48 hours, in the message, he directly linked his demand that Denmark hand over Greenland to his personal grievance over not getting the Nobel Prize. And so one person said, well, to some people, it reads like a parody, but it really is true. You know, as the State Department sent this to all these different countries. And so, again, some people, this is what the 25th Amendment is for, wrote one person. And Andy Kim says, unhinged, embarrassing, but also incredibly dangerous. Trump is doing lasting damage to our global position, which will harm our ability to keep America safe, secure, and prosperous. Well, that's absolutely true. You know, this first round of tariffs and the chaos that he's done, as I talked about, this has made it impossible for a lot of businesses to do business and to stay in business because they don't know what their expenses are going to be. They're fluctuating wildly depending on what Trump had for dinner last night and whether he had nightmares and woke up in the middle of the night tweeting. And so we see yet another example of this, even as his case is before the Supreme Court in terms of tariffs. He is out there in the middle of the night saying, okay, well, France doesn't want to join my peace board, so I'm going to put a 200% tariff against their wine and champagne. You know, he's already killed the Kentucky bourbon industry, pretty much. They're closing, you know, it's crashing because people are boycotting American products in other countries. And what we've always known about the tariffs are that they are a tax and that the president doesn't have the authority to unilaterally declare a tax. That's the legal issue that's there. And his appeal to the IEPA thing, saying that it is an emergency, is a fraud. It's a lie. The Supreme Court should know this from the legal standpoint. But his other recourse is to say, well, if we have to give back all the money that we've stolen from people, it's going to be a mess. It's going to be chaos. So he now tries to make a pragmatic argument against it. Even as you have industries like the Kentucky bourbon industry being shut down. Now he wants to try to shut down the French wine and champagne industry with tariffs as well, but it's blowing back. And we've always known that it's a tariff that ultimately it'll be reflected in higher prices for Americans. I've been to the UK a couple of times. When we went on our honeymoon, actually, it was more noticeable when we went back in 1984 when the dollar was strong. But even on our honeymoon when the dollar was weak, it was unbelievable in terms of just normalizing what people paid for commodities like cameras and things like that from Japan, which were not being manufactured in the UK. But because they were worried about this idea of a trade deficit, they put very heavy duties on a lot of things. And so I looked at the price of it and I thought, even with this, we went in 1980, the American dollar was very, very weak after Carter. And we went back in 1984, it was very, very strong. Everything was relatively cheap then. But even in 1980, things that they were importing were far more expensive in the UK than they were in America, even though the UK currency, the pound, was much stronger than the American dollar at the time. And it was all due to tariffs. Tariffs that had nothing to do with anything except for this fetish about a trade deficit. Again, if you're not making the product, you don't have anybody that's making cameras. Why put a tax on cameras coming from Japan? But they did that anyway. And so it is ultimately paid by the consumer. We all know that. Now there's been another study, the Wall Street Journal has it, saying exactly that it's causing prices to go up in America. But in addition to that, his volatility, his vacillation is causing American businesses to go out of business. And the ill will that he's created makes it so that people in other countries are boycotting American products like Kentucky bourbon to the extent that they're shutting down factories in Kentucky. So that's the truth of all this. George Conway said the entire world knows we have a president who's mentally ill. When are we as a nation going to start talking about that? Yeah, that's exactly right. He's, we hear the expression all the time. Don't take Trump literally, but take him seriously. Well, I think we literally need to take him seriously because the guy is absolutely unhinged and a bull in a china shop. One person said, this is like a letter from a child. Unfortunately, it's a child with enormous destructive power at his disposal. I looked at that and I thought of the Twilight Zone episode where he had Billy Mummy as a little kid that everybody was afraid of because he could wish him into the cornfield and turn him into a jack-in-the-box or something like that. And that's the way people behave around Trump, isn't it? Do you love your job so much that you allow injustices and the overthrow of the Constitution by this petty little toddler tyrant? It's pathetic. Larry Sabato says Trump is throwing an infantile temper tantrum because he didn't get the Nobel Peace Prize. And again, Trump doesn't even have the self-awareness to understand how this looks to the world. And so we look at the taunts with the text, memes, and trash talk that happened last night in another Greenland blitz. Trump compressed a week's worth of diplomatic taunting into a single overnight burst of social media activity on Tuesday, calling NATO's Secretary General, announcing a Greenland summit, and leaking private messages, mocking Canada's sovereignty, and attacking the UK over a key U.S. military base. And so that's how he spent the night. I hope the rest of you got some sleep last night. And then he puts up, get this, see if you have this article. I don't know if I sent this one to you or not. I don't think I did. But there's a picture. They actually did an AI picture where he's in the Oval Office and he's got all the leaders of Europe sitting around in front of him and he's holding court. And on the side, they've got a map that shows all the Western Hemisphere with an American flag over it. This is something that was created by AI. This is something that Trump pushed out. This is what he tweeted out. An AI-produced image of him presenting a doctored map of the Western Hemisphere showing Canada, Greenland, and Venezuela all under a U.S. flag. And he's showing this to all the European leaders that are there. This is how childish it is. Then there's another one. He's planting the flag on Greenland. There's a sign that says, Greenland, U.S. territory established 2026. And standing behind him are Little Marco and J.D. Vance. How pathetic is that? He closed the barrage by attacking Britain over the great stupidity of his decision to turn the sovereignty of the Chagos Islands to Mauritius, if that's how you pronounce that country. Now, I've never even noticed the name of it. It's where they have the Diego Garcia military base. He's upset about the fact that was turned over to them, even though Marco Rubio welcomed it and said it was a great thing that was happening. So maybe he's just getting warmed up for Davos. Maybe he wants to go there and fight everybody. He wants to be seen as the anti-globalist, but he's the guy who is consolidating everything. I mean, he wants to have his own little private UN where you pay $1 billion to join. He calls it a peace board. He wants to run the Federal Reserve. He wants to take over one country after the other. I've never seen an American president openly doing this kind of stuff and boasting about it. They all are ashamed if they do this kind of thing in the past. They've done it in the past, but they're ashamed of it. He's boasting about it. And yet, at the same time, he is obsessed over getting this Peace Prize. Is it because Obama got one? Is that why you have to have it? I just don't understand. So we're going to take a quick break, and when we come back, we're going to take a look at what is a run-up to Davos. So stay with us. We'll be right back.
Using free speech to free minds. It's the David Knight Show.
Well, and as we see Davos about to kick off, it's kind of interesting to think about the agenda of the globalists. Big part of this, of course, is the Great Replacement, destroying native cultures and everything about a country so they can level everything down and then build it back up with their homogenized, culturalist world. And so we're seeing a big pushback against that. We're seeing that this is really backfiring in the UK. It's kind of in the same way that Davos's you'll own nothing and you'll be happy backfired on them. In the UK, they created this thing that was, they called it Amelia. It was an avatar that was actually funded by the UK government as part of a quote-unquote educational project. It was really propaganda to lecture people about why they needed to be tolerant and accept the destruction of their culture and their country. And so it was UK government-funded education program. It was part of an interactive learning tool, a game that they called Pathways. And this is what the avatar looked like. This is Amelia. She's got purple hair. And there is a UK flag there, but then they do everything they can to destroy that. It is aimed at teaching teens media literacy and awareness of online radicalization. So they were going to use Amelia to tell them, don't believe what you hear on social media. Don't believe what other people tell you. Listen to us. We are the ministry of truth. And so if you disagree with them, of course, you are radicalized, you are extreme, and especially on views of things like anti-immigration views or other thought crimes. The character, a purple-haired, goth-style young woman, was designed as an antagonist or a negative example in the program. It was created under a government contract, a funding initiative. So I said, yeah, here's this flag-waving Amelia. You don't want to be like her.
Yes, young men routinely don't want to adopt views of attractive young women.
That's right.
What idiot came up with this?
It backfired big time, folks, big time. So what they did was they took that cartoon character that was created by the UK government to lecture people, say, don't be anti-immigration, don't be like Amelia and everything. And they made her hyper-patriotic. Here's an example.
Tonks? No, I'm Amelia. We need to talk about Islam in the UK. Catholic, Protestant, atheist. We're all buggered if Islam takes over. Witches must be burnt, of course, but honour killing your daughters for not wearing hijab is much too far.
But Wallace, dogs are haram. If the Muslims take over, Gromit is a goner.
Pigs are haram too, Pepper. Your entire family line ended.
And forget LGBT acceptance. Muslims will toss them out the window. Literally. First, we remove the Islamists from our government and our country, Paddington. Then marmalade.
Excellent job. They took this character that was created to shame people about being patriotic, and they doubled down on her. Here's another example there's several of these videos out there.
Hi, I'm Amelia. I'm English, and I love England. I like having fish and chips and a pint at the local pub. I like Shakespeare and Dickens, Tolkien and Lewis, Harry Potter.
I like pork sausage and dogs and fashion.
Haram! Haram!
But I don't like that. Brits are famously polite, but it mustn't mean we're willing to commit cultural suicide.
Our institutions, the Church of England, the BBC, are a bunch of queers and nonces.
How the bloody hell did we go from Churchill to you git?
So you get the idea. And where is this kind of stuff really coming from? Well, it was at Davos where we had Ursula, who is fond of lying, so concerned about what she calls disinformation, which would be any information that dismisses what she's telling you in terms of lies.
Excellencies, ladies and gentlemen, dear Klaus, your annual global risk report makes for a stunning and sobering read. For the global business community, the top concern for the next 2 years is not conflict or climate, it is disinformation and misinformation, followed closely by polarization within our societies.
In a world of deceit, telling the truth is a revolutionary act. You are listening to The David Knight Show.
Yeah, Herr Klaus is not going to be there this year at Davos. But instead, they're going to have Frau Trump, or I should say, Frau Laura. She's going to be there singing, I guess, and Trump is going to be, Daddy Trump is going to be talking to these people, trying to convince his followers that he is anti-globalist, even though he implements their agendas for them. Think back to 2020. Do you realize what happened in 2020? It was the globalist agenda writ large. It was the lockdown and universal basic income, all kinds of conditioning for a global digital ID. Now, you got to have a pass in order to get these different places, right? Well, her singing has been called a Geneva Convention violation. And she's just done another music video. As a matter of fact, they're putting up this hero video of her everywhere. So much so that many people couldn't abide it anymore. And she's got an interesting history. began back in 2023, her singing history. And as Yahoo Entertainment points out, what they call the Tom Petty era. It started with a cover of Tom Petty's I Won't Back Down, a choice that came with baggage, given that the Tom Petty estate had issued a cease and desist order to the Trump campaign in 2020 for using the song at rallies. So she did a cover of it. And this is their way to double down, I guess. Her cover debuted in the top 10 of Billboard's digital song sales chart because, again, MAGA is going to buy it. However, most listeners were less impressed. One called it bad auto-tuned karaoke. Another said they couldn't believe how bad it was. They had been prepared for the horror that she might have a great voice, only to find it embarrassingly awful. At the 2024 White House Correspondents' Dinner, Colin Jost addressed Trump directly, and he said, she recently released a cover of I Won't Back Down. On hearing it, Tom Petty died again. And he said, I can't believe I'm saying this to a member of the Trump family, but maybe you should stick to politics. Then 2024, the firefighter tribute, Hero, which has been everywhere, absolutely everywhere. So in response, some people put out a auto-tune, a version of Hero that they said was not auto-tuned, and it sounds like this.
Here's the premiere of my new song, Hero, brought to you today for the first time without auto-tune.
Without your bravery, we're all out of luck. No, this can't be denied. You gotta be special.
Those are goats.
Takes a lot to put you last and everybody first. This can't be denied. Your heart they can make go.
I guess that's to drive home the idea that she is not the GOAT. She is not the greatest of all time, to say the least. You know, when you look at Davos, before we get to that, she's actually saying, well, there's a lot of people who don't want me to sing at the Erica Kirk alternative event at halftime for the Super Bowl. And I told them, you know, I would be available or whatever. So, you know, she's pretending that the left doesn't want her so that the right will invite her.
I heard that there are a lot of people out there on the left who are melting down and very upset about the possibility that I might be performing at the halftime show for the Super Bowl for Turning Point USA. While my joking offer, which was clearly a comical and joking offer, still to perform. I've not been asked in any formal way.
But if you invite me, you can own the left.
Point halftime show for the Super Bowl. But everybody out there continue getting upset about it and freaking out about it.
That's amazing. It's amazing how she looks, too. I think she's taking Ozempic. Doesn't it cause your eyes to sink back in the sockets like that? I've never seen anything like that. What kind of a look is that? I don't know, but it is the Mar-a-Lago plastic surgery plague that they have seems to affect it all. Is it contagious, this lip pumping and all the rest of the stuff? But
it's a social contagion.
It definitely is. Definitely is. But she's got a hard act to follow. I mean, when we look at globalist confabs, I think the best of all time, my favorite at least, was Vladimir Putin's Blueberry Hill. That's the wrong one.
No, I'm Amelia. We need to talk about Islam in the UK. Catholic, Protestant, atheist.
Not there. Hang on, you got it, don't you, Travis?
Yeah, give me a second.
But you remember that? I think it's great. A lot of people don't like it anymore because Putin is out of favor, but it is a reminder that at one point in time, he was a darling of the globalists. Now they don't like him. So, yeah, let's give it a try. Here we go.
I found my favorite.
This is my favorite rendition of this song, quite frankly.
On Blueberry Hill. When I found
And all the celebrities there. There's Jean Depardieu, been accused of sexual harassment.
on Blueberry Hill and linger until
Kevin Costner was there.
my dreams came true.
Everybody, sing along. There we go. That's the best karaoke right there. Well, again, it's a fan favorite. It's kind of like Porky Pig's rendition of Blue Christmas. So Davos is going to skip, Denmark rather, is going to skip the Davos forum and protest not over Laura Trump, but what that other Trump is singing, the Donald. And so they're not going to go. It really has spoiled the party for them. Denmark is saying that something is rotten in the U.S. That's a turn the tables thing here. But Davos has also disinvited Iran. Of course, Russia's not going to be there as well. Iran has been disinvited because of their ICE-like repression of people in that police state. But the EU will still push censorship, as they always do. And that's going to be the top of the list. You can count on that. Well, we're going to take a quick break. And when we come back, we're going to take a look at Donald Trump's peace board. And what is that really about? We'll be right back.
Defending the American Dream. You're listening to The David Knight Show.
Well, last night, Trump threw an unhinged tariff tantrum, as well as the other things that were said, over the prospect of France refusing to join his new Board of Peace, even as he was saying he was bored of peace. This should be digging a very deep hole for him at the Supreme Court. There was never a legal argument that would allow him to do this. So he fell back on a pragmatic argument. But just take a look at this. Here's a situation where you've got a guy who says to a foreign country, well, you don't give me the peace prize. You don't want to join my club? Well, I'll club you with a 200% tariff. Just like that. I mean, do we really want to have one person have that kind of authority? I hope that the Supreme Court shuts this down, because the Congress isn't going to touch anything that Trump did with a 10-foot pole. They're scared to death of him. And so again, this is on 200% tariff on French wine and champagne. And this is blowing both ways. Trump is an agent of chaos and destruction. He's destroying America's friendship and good relations with Canada and the UK. We're getting booed at sporting events because of Trump and because of these tariffs and his comments, his arrogant comments about making Canada the 51st state and nonsense like that. And so there's boycotts against American products, like I said before, the Kentucky bourbon industry shutting down. So it's destructive on both sides. And again, people can't make business plans because they don't know what their costs are going to be. Not only is he changing it, on again, off again, on again, off again, but it's massive amounts that he's putting on there. And these amounts are going to be paid by American citizens, or it's going to be paid in the fact that you can't get what it is that you want to buy. I don't want to buy French wine or champagne, but that's just an example. So Trump has threatened to slap a hefty 200% tariff on French wine and champagne if France refuses his invitation to join his newly formed Board of Peace. The board ostensibly is created to supervise the reconstruction of Gaza, but it seems to have a much wider remit of maintaining global order, with Trump at the head, of course, and paying him money, of course. And so a source close to Macron said that France does not intend to answer favorably to the invitation, pointing out that the board's charter, quote, goes beyond the sole framework of Gaza. It'll cost $1 billion to join. It's chaired by Trump. It's been attacked by critics as an attempt by the U.S. president to create a rival UN with himself as the head. That's what I said at the top of the show. I said, he looks at these evil organizations, the UN, the Federal Reserve, and rather than destroying it, this Boromir decides that he's going to be the one who's going to run it. And of course, I don't even think that he initially has good intentions. I think he just sees power. He doesn't care if it's evil, and he wants to seize that power. And so he wants to be the Federal Reserve Board, one-man board. He wants to be a one-man UN. He's doing this everywhere. And so, of course, you would pay him to be in this club. So the threat of a French wine tariff is just one facet of a larger diplomatic disagreement that's revolving around Greenland. And again, as the story goes, the joke goes, what's the difference between Greenland and Trump? Greenland isn't for sale. With Trump, pay $1 billion and you can be on his peace board, right? Whoop-de-doo. Trump has threatened to impose tariffs of up to 25% on 8 European countries, including Denmark, France, Germany, and the UK, unless Greenland is ceded to U.S. control. And again, when you look at what Biden did, Biden destroyed the credibility of the U.S. dollar and the reserve system that we had. That was our secret weapon that allowed us to create unlimited amounts. It was like a credit card that you never have to pay off, a credit card that has no limit. I mean, we're up to 39 trillion now, thanks to Trump adding 2 trillion just last year to the deficit. And so Biden kicked it off, and Trump is continuing and extending all of this stuff. It's a tag team match. Trump started the spending at a new level during the 2020 nonsense. They handed off the pandemic fraud. They handed off the bioweapon shot to each other. And they continue the work of the other guy. And everybody is so caught up in this partisanship stuff that they say, yeah, but what about that guy? What about that guy? Don't criticize my guy. Look what the other guy did. And so Biden then also starts to destroy the dollar system as a reserve system. And Trump is picking up on that. He is isolating us from everybody. And look, I'm fine with isolation, and I'm fine with some of these other policies, but it's the way that he's doing it, which is so destructive of what he said he wants to preserve and build, including American manufacturing and American businesses. It's very destructive. And so again, whether you're talking about whatever issue you're talking about, even if you agree with Trump on the stated end, you have to look at the way that he's going about it and how destructive it is and how dangerous the precedents that he's setting truly are. And so that is the case with the tariffs and the unilateral tariffs as well. But let's talk a little bit about this so-called Board of Peace. As Brian Shalavi points out, all eyes now turn to Palestine as Trump unveils his Board of Peace for Gaza, which could replace the UN. And again, he's looking more and more to a lot of people like the Antichrist. Maybe he wins that award as most likely to be Antichrist. He certainly is checking all the boxes, the man of sin. Anyway, this new board will include billionaires and heads of state. Interestingly, no head of state from Israel has been named yet, only a billionaire Jew who lives in Cyprus. Two countries that allegedly received invitations to join the board are countries that Israel has now publicly protested against, Turkey and Qatar. Israel is complaining that they were not consulted on the makeup of the board, but he's got bigger fish to fry. I mean, it may be dead on arrival because of opposition from Israel, but Gaza is just the initiation of what he wants to do with this board. Again, that's why France is pulling back on this, because everybody sees that he's trying to cut out the UN and do it on his own, just like he's doing with the Federal Reserve. And so it may not happen because of Israel's pushback against this. Putin was offered a seat on Trump's Peace Council. I found my thrill on the Blueberry Council. The initiative envisions an international council overseeing reconstruction funding, security agreements, and political coordination in Gaza, working alongside a Palestinian technocratic administration during a transitional period. The White House has said the body could later be expanded to address other conflicts. The interesting thing is that he doesn't have anybody on the peace board that includes the Palestinian interests. Isn't that a tell? And again, I think this is about something that is far more than that. So if you want to participate, you can do it for 3 years for free, and then you have to pay $1 billion to stay in it. It's like one of these enticement offers, try it for free for 3 years. Speaking to reporters on Monday, Dmitry Peskov, who is the Kremlin spokesperson, said that Putin had been invited to join the body through diplomatic channels. He said, "We are studying the details of the proposal. We hope to hold contacts with the U.S. side with the U.S. side to clarify all of the nuances." Because again, the devil is in the details, and Trump makes these broad proposals without any details at all. They get added later. A wide range of countries across Europe, the Middle East, and Asia have been invited. Well, Richard Haass, who is no friend of ours, folks, he was a George W. Bush guy, an advisor to him. He was the president of the Council on Foreign Relations from 2003 to 2023. So 20 years, this guy was head of one of the most destructive globalist organizations out there, Richard Haass. And he is apoplectic about this because he's concerned that it's going to be damaging to the UN, maybe even replacing the UN. This is what a lot of people are saying. And so he said executive membership reportedly is going to include senior U.S. officials, some international figures, people like Marco Rubio, Steve Witkoff, Jared Kushner, and, other billionaires, because, primarily it's like a grift, I wonder if your gold or platinum card gets you admitted for temporary membership. He's always looking for a money angle, isn't he? Have you ever seen a situation where green cards are sold for millions of dollars to rich foreigners? I think when you do that, you're not going to get their best people, quite frankly. Trump may love billionaires, and he does. And he loves globalists as well. Makes you kind of wonder if Trump really is a blue-collar billionaire, as he pretends to be. I never bought that shtick. So anyway, it's kind of a parallel to the UN, said Richard Haass. And it's not Gaza only. And by the way, the Israelis are unhappy with it because you've got countries like Turkey on it who have an agenda that the Israelis don't like. Netanyahu is disagreeing with this. And then listen to what Richard Haass says. Again, president of the Council on Foreign Relations for 20 years. We ought to be paying countries if they're actually helping towards peace. We should be incentivizing them. In other words, forget about that $39 trillion in debt that we have on the credit card. We should be paying people to get onto this board of peace if we're going to do that. But he's also concerned because he sees it as a kind of replacement for the UN. Well, there's going to be 3 centers of power in the New World, says an op-ed piece from RT. African countries are undergoing the most significant geopolitical recalibration of the past century. And what they're pointing out is that this new document laying out U.S. strategy in terms of security terms, so basically what it's doing is pulling back from Africa. So the take from RT is that Trump is going to pull back from Africa, let China run their Belt and Road Initiative and do the mining and produce all the raw materials that we need, and just have them manage it, and we can get the stuff from them. And then with all the different fighting interests in Africa, maybe Russia will be the ones to be the global policeman there in Africa. So that's the RT take on it. What analysts have speculated about for 2 decades is now codified policy. The post-Cold War epoch of unipolar American hegemony, draped in the language of liberal internationalism and universal values, has been formally terminated. The moral pretense of the West, the insistence that its foreign policy was primarily driven by promotion of democracy and human rights, has been exposed as fiction in the face of stark national interests. In its place, a transactional tripolar order has been institutionalized. This is defined by the U.S., China, and the Russian Federation, and it can now be called the finalized operational manual for 21st century geopolitics. Contrary to the myth of a globally engaged superpower, the U.S. has executed a deliberate and historic retrenchment. Its latest national security strategy paper is a document of strategic contraction. The primary focus is unambiguous: the consolidation of the American hemisphere. The Fortress America doctrine prioritizes economic and security integration from Canada to Chile. Well, it's actually from Greenland to Galapagos, really. Running the Western Hemisphere, or turning it, rather, into an impregnable zone of influence. Secondary interests are reserved exclusively for the Anglosphere, the UK, Canada, Australia, New Zealand. Culturally and institutionally aligned institutions that serve as force multipliers. And again, those 4 countries, along with the U.S., are the 5 Eyes. They put it out there as EYES, but it's actually the 5 Eyes in terms of intelligence organizations. And they're the ones who really run their countries for the most part. The critical passage for Africa and Asia is what the document omits: a strategy for direct engagement. The U.S. is officially disengaged from strategic competition on the African continent. It will close remaining bases, cease military and designed aid that is designed for influence, end its democracy and governance programs. Washington's approach is now one of efficient outsourcing. Its insatiable need for cobalt, lithium, and rare earth elements, the lifeblood of its digital and green economies, will no longer be sourced through messy dealings with individual African states. Instead, the U.S. will procure these resources via bulk state-to-state transactions with the continent's recognized managers, China and Russia. Now, this is coming from Russia. I don't see that happening, quite frankly, regardless of what this document says. How, as one person put it, are you going to fight a war with your adversary, China, using materials that you have to buy from China, right? It's just that simple. That's not going to happen. And so they can talk about this, but really the Belt and Road Initiative, but also BRICS, it's all about a resetting of the financial system. As a matter of fact, you had Mark Carney, who is the bankster globalist. This guy, even though he's Canadian, he has been head of both the Canadian Central Bank and the UK Central Bank before they made him the prime minister. And he was asked what he meant when he talked about a new world order the other day. And this is what Mark Carney had to say.
Prime Minister Brian Platt with Bloomberg News. Yesterday when you met with Premier Lee, one of the things you said in the public remarks was this partnership with Canada and China, this new partnership, sets us up well for the new world order. What did you mean by that? What is the new world order?
Well, it's a great question, Brian, because I think the world is still determining what that that order is going to be. And let's be clear what we're talking about first and foremost, which is what is going to govern global trade? What is the role of the WTO going to be? How important are bilateral deals such as the one we're developing, plurilateral deals, if I can use that term, Trans-Pacific Partnership, potential linkages between Trans-Pacific Partnership and the EU? Where is financial regulation, payment system regulation going to fit into that? All of these aspects, I'm going to use a fancy word, like the architecture, the multilateral system that has been developing these is being eroded, to use a polite term, undercut, use another term. So the question is, what gets built in that place? How much of a patchwork is it? How much is it just on a bilateral basis? Or where do like-minded countries in certain areas? So like-minded countries, just to be clear, doesn't mean you agree on everything. Aspects, for example, on digital trade or agricultural trade. Climate finance is another area.
Climate finance, the green MacGuffin that's there. You understand what is happening? You notice how he's still talking about the Trans-Pacific Partnership? Thought we put that to bed? Well, no, actually. You've got a couple of different competing visions. Both of these visions really are about global governance. But there are competing versions of this. Just like you got the Republicans and Democrats, they both want to take us to a very bad place, but they have competing ways that they want to do that. And so when you look at the Trans-Pacific Partnership and the Transatlantic Partnership, as I said before, the way these guys have always operated, that's one of the reasons why they call it the World Economic Forum. These leftover Nazis from World War II, people like Prince Bernhard and people like the British equivalent. What was the guy's name? It's Peter. I can't remember his name now. Anyway, the two of them who started the World Economic Forum did it on the 10th anniversary of the last victory of the Nazis with Peter Carrington, I think it was. Lord Carrington, I think was the guy's name. Anyway, there was concern there. If you look at A Bridge Too Far, Operation Market Garden, there was concern that those plans were betrayed to the Nazis. And then, of course, Peter Carrington, by Prince Bernhard, Peter Carrington had a role in terms of holding back reinforcements to make sure that the people on the bridge didn't get any reinforcements. And then, interestingly enough, the two of them come together to have the very first meeting of the World Economic Forum at the Bilderberg Hotel. Not the World Economic Forum, but they had their first Bilderberg conference at the hotel named Bilderberg. And again, it is focused on economics. The Germans tried to take over the world twice by force. Then they're going to do it by economics. And it was on the 10th anniversary of that last victory by the Nazis. And both the founders had a big role to play in making sure that the Nazis won that. And so they're trying to do it with economic aspects. How do they do that economically? Well, first you create a free trade zone. Then you have a unified currency like the euro. And then what you do is you unify Europe. And then you do same type of thing in 3 other places. This is the Trilateral Commission vision of Zbigniew Brzezinski, which they liked so much that they made him the effective president for Jimmy Carter. Just like Kissinger, Bilderberger, was the effective president for Richard Nixon, especially on global economics and trade issues and things like that. So these guys envisioned a system where we have a unification of U.S. and Pacific trading partnership, with China, no restrictions on trade there, so we can start to unify economically. And then same thing with the transatlantic. So you wind up with these 2 unified trading spheres, and of course it's like wings of a butterfly. And guess what the body was? The body was the United States that would join both the transatlantic and the trans-Pacific. We could gradually bring these free trade zones together into a global governance. Competing against that is the technocratic vision of Fortress America. First, we're going to have a very strong America, and it's going to be not necessarily independent, but it will get really strong and then eventually take over the others, right? And it's always these 3 different spheres. Isn't it interesting? That's how Orwell saw it as well. You got to have 3 there. Otherwise, it gets That's the number that seems to work really well in terms of the competition. And so this is where they're headed with this. And when you look at what BRICS is doing, so there's a lot of different things that are happening with it. You're going to have something of a clash between the technocrats who want a technate here of the Western Hemisphere and the globalists who have been trying to achieve global governance by having these trade zones that are then united, gradually consolidated. And so they both want to take us to the same place, quite frankly. And when you look at how they want to control things, you know, the Americans have got their stablecoin way that they want to control everything that we do and lock it down, in the same way that the Europeans have their CBDC. And of course, they're looking at how they can unify their digital currencies to make sure they have a global currency in that. That's the approach from the BRICS members. None of them have fully launched a retail CBDC, but all 5 core members are running pilot programs. And India's e-rupee has reached about 7 million retail users since they launched it in 2022. China is rapidly expanding their digital yuan. Past attempts, however, to when they look at this and they say, well, we want to have the BRICS and we want to have economic unification. Again, you can have a trade zone, but it starts to come back down to what kind of a currency you're going to use. What's the money going to be? And so the problem that they had with BRICS, especially after Biden escalated this with the sanctions against Russia, Russia started trading locally in local currencies between Russia and India. The problem is that they ran into the barter problem on a geopolitical scale, on a global scale, an international scale. Russia started accumulating large balances of India's paper currency, the rupee, and they couldn't do anything with it. It was difficult to deploy. And so now this goes back to why money was invented in the first place, right? Because you got a barter situation with somebody, you have somebody comes out and fixes your air conditioning. Maybe there's not really anything that you've got to give that person in terms of a service. So how do you pay them? Well, that's why we got money, right? And what is the real money that has always been there? It's not these paper currencies that are fictional creations of central banks. The real money is gold and silver. And that is why the rush is on for real money. They're trying to restructure all these different financial systems. And the financial stuff is at the heart of the global governance. It's at the heart of the wars as well. All the wars are banker wars. So interest in CBDs has cooled globally as stablecoins have gained popularity, even though India is continuing to promote their CBDC. But they're worried that stablecoins is going to be a competition for them. And when you go back and look at the strategic alliances there's questions from many people that maybe what Trump is trying to do with Venezuela is trying to prop up this broken dollar with oil again, which is what Kissinger did with the petrodollar. The problem is things have changed, and you can't just repeat that. Even though Trump wants to be a one-man Federal Reserve, the world has caught on to the fraud. When you look at just the basic level, go back to 1971 when they started working on the petrodollar. We had a deficit at that point in time of $250 billion. Where are we now? 39 trillion. 39 trillion. So we are about 100 times where we were, actually a little bit more than that. And you might say, well, part of that is because the dollar has declined 99% in value in terms of purchasing price since 1971, and that is against gold. And that may be a part of it, but still, the fact that they've weaponized the dollar, first beginning with Biden in 2022, and now by Trump adding on to this and continuing the Biden policies that are so destructive to America. Nobody wants to have the U.S. Treasury bonds anymore. This is that used to be the gold standard according to the Bank of International Settlement. And even they are saying, well, no, actually we want gold at this point. pace of all this move towards gold has tripled since the Biden sanctions of 2022. And again, what we're starting to see when you look at petrodollars, because of Biden's actions, you had Russia selling oil for gold. So you got the currency completely out of it. And if you have oil being sold for gold, that is the most dangerous thing for the American currency. Central banks now hold more gold than they do U.S. Treasury bills. Even the Bank of International Settlement confesses that gold is the superior strategic reserve asset rather than the once sacred U.S. 10-year Treasury bond. And so the American government, as they point out in this article from Zero Hedge, has gone from nervous to violent. Dollar-backed oil is essential to its paper currency's survival. Just look at people like Gaddafi and Hussein, who each tried to sell oil outside of the dollar. They didn't survive personally. And of course, Gaddafi, we saw leaked emails by WikiLeaks, leaked emails where Hillary Clinton was talking about how Muammar Gaddafi was trying to set up a financial system backed by gold that was outside of the Western financial system. That can't be allowed to happen. So they came, they saw, he died. As Kissinger noted decades ago, commanding a world reserve currency equally requires having the world's strongest military. In short, monetary and military might go hand in hand to protect U.S. interests. And so that's why these two things are, when we look at it, the shaky dollar is also going to be a shaky U.S. military. We run on debt. We run on very, very expensive weapons, concentrated power and concentrated weapons, and that may not work out too well in a war. Although China took only 4% of Venezuelan oil in yuan purchases from the Belt and Road Initiative, 95% of Iran's oil goes to China and is sold in yuan, not in dollars. And so as he points out, is it any coincidence that regime change in Iran is almost a daily headline, deadly headline as well. This is a great quote from Ernest Hemingway. Remember, he was the one who, in his book, The Sun Also Rises, he had a very wealthy individual who had gone bankrupt. And somebody said, with that much money, how in the world did you ever go bankrupt? And he said, well, gradually, then suddenly, right? Well, there's another quote from Ernest Hemingway, which is perhaps explains a lot of what Trump is doing. He says the first panacea for a mismanaged nation is inflation of the currency, and the second panacea is war. He said both of these bring a temporary prosperity, but both of them bring a permanent ruin. Both are the refuge of political and economic opportunists. That's the Trump policy in a nutshell, folks. Ernest Hemingway knew it. Human nature does not change. None of this stuff changes. And so, again, as you look at the strategic issues here, it's really more about money than anything else. And imagine, says one headline here, imagine ramping up a wartime economy where most of the stuff that you shoot at the enemy comes from the enemy. That's why I don't think we're going to get out of Africa. That's not going to happen. But again, what do you do about this? I say all this because I firmly believe that, unfortunately, we haven't seen the worst of the chaos yet. That's really going to accelerate. And I think the accelerating chaos is going to be a squeeze, like a small hose for gold and silver. Everybody's going to be rushing for it because it's real. It gives them credibility. Everybody's trying to design a new financial order, a new system. And that is the fundamental issue. The Americans may pretend that gold is not as important as it really is, but they're just pretending, and they're just lying to you. We're going to take a quick break, folks, and we're going to be right back. And when we come back, we're going to take a look at some of the news here. There's an amazing story about one individual talking about one doctor who has been persecuted for pushing back against the vaccines. unbelievable. She said, for all the patients that I treated during this COVID fake pandemic, if instead of giving them ivermectin or hydroxychloroquine or something like that, if I'd given them a shot, the hospital that I was working at was charging so much for these shots, I would have made $35 million. She walked away from that and has fought against these Trump shots because this whole thing was run for the money. It was run by the money. The root of all evil, the love of money. And so, again, it was Trump who was bribing and blackmailing governors, hospitals, doctors to do all this stuff to us. We'll be right back.
You're listening to The David Knight Show.
Well, I'm sure we'll be hearing more from Ursula von der Leyen, or as I call her, Ursula fond of lying, at Davos. But she's already been talking about free speech. That seems to be a real hobby horse of hers. She beats that to death, censorship. And she's at it again. I played the clip for you earlier from an earlier Davos meeting where she was addressing Herr Klaus. Now she's saying free speech is a virus and we need a vaccine. She's just talking about censorship. You know, it's interesting. We just got some of our home movies for many years we've had on tapes. I've always planned on doing it myself, but now my VCRs don't work anymore, so I've got to farm this stuff out. So we've just got some of our home movies transferred, and I was always looking for this tape that I made in the British Children's Museum. As the boys were playing and letting off steam, they had, for all the kids as they were playing, they had a TV that was just running on a loop, this whole idea of the Gaia theory, that Mother Earth is some kind of a sentient being. And guess what the virus is in that MacGuffin? People. The people have to be controlled. The people have to be reduced. You have to reduce the population. I recorded that, and I said, I'm going to get that transferred one day, and I'm going to play that on the air. And unfortunately, when I got the thing in, it was so noisy because all the kids were yelling and screaming in the background as they're playing, you know, this thing's going on, that even though you could hear it very clearly when you're there, you know how that is when you got an audio tape. It kind of all mixes together and you can't hear it that well. Well, Lance has identified a piece of AI software. We'll see how it works. They can go through and filter out all the Walla Walla that's in the background and give you the, because this happens frequently with tapes that we have. A lot of times you'll have a situation where somebody in a political context, especially if it's a hot mic, they're saying something, but there's all kinds of noise and clatter that is making it very hard to hear what the person is hearing. So we're going to see if that AI is any good. And if it is, I'll play that for you. But yeah, they're constantly referring to the things that they don't like as viruses. And the reality is that these people are a cancer. These people really are cancer. You know, government is just like virology. It is a lie. Just like virology, government is a MacGuffin that is there to control people. And so in 2024, Ursula von der Leyen is so unpopular. She was made president of the European Commission, as Expose News calls her, the ultra girl boss extraordinaire. She came out swinging against free speech in a white-knuckle speech in which she likened malign information to a virus that society must be inoculated against by the state, obviously through the vaccine of pre-bunking, which is just a euphemism for censorship. She was so unpopular in her own country of Germany that Germany was the only EU member to abstain from voting for her in 2019. And so as technology is evolving, we need to build up societal immunity, she said, around information manipulation. Research has shown that pre-bunking is more successful than debunking. And again, they have been working on this for a very long time, the Coalition for Content Provenance and Authentication, to make sure they identify and rank people. And she's not the only one. We just had that Israeli billionaire Shlomo who said, we need to rank people, come up with some kind of a social credit scoring system. We rank people. And if you are lowly ranked, you don't get to post anything on the internet. We'll intercept it and stop it beforehand. And of course, you've got other tech companies that have been working to make that happen. Intel, ARM, as well as Adobe. And so the CPU manufacturers, the software manufacturers working with mainstream media to shut people down. And so she said, pre-bunking is the same approach because disinformation relies on people passing it on to others. It's essential that people know what malign information influence is and what the techniques are that are behind it. Well, these are the people that, in spite of 45 years of maintaining a house in the UK, they called it a cold house, as you heard the Baileys talking about it, Mark and Sam. They wanted to see how colds are transmitted. And somehow they were never able to get it to be transmitted as hard as they tried. And so when we look at the story that I said before we took the break, a doctor was punished for questioning COVID vaccines. She said she could have made up to $35 million by giving shots. And this is Mary Talley Bowden, who you've seen her very vocally opposing these agendas. She was working at a hospital in Houston Methodist, and she said her admitting privileges were suspended because she questioned the Trump shots. They call this the COVID-19 vaccine throughout because just the news is not going to give Trump what he desperately craves, and that is credit for this bioweapon. Anyway, she was prescribing ivermectin to COVID patients, and she subsequently resigned from and unsuccessfully sued Houston Methodist for defamation. She said she could have made tens of millions of dollars. And here's the economics of it. She showed a spreadsheet that she took from Houston Methodist's public list of charges for various treatments. They start at $1,000 for the Pfizer vaccine for 5 to 11-year-olds, and then it tops out at $6,000 for the 2023-2024 recombinant adjuvated vaccine targeting Omicron, possibly referring to Novavax. She said, if I had vaccinated the 6,000 patients that I treated for COVID, I could have made $35.5 million. Because again, they are charging nearly $6,000 per shot there. And so she said, isn't that amazing? No wonder they do that. This has all been about the money. And it's amazing how naive the MAGA people are. They are so hardcore tied to a political party, tied to a particular politician, Trump, and they have absolutely no idea how politics works. They have absolutely no idea how the government continually gets around the 10th Amendment by bribery and by blackmail. So she said, this is a hospital that charges $5 for aspirin, which again is a single aspirin, which again is outrageous. They'll give you a discount. They'll charge you $2.50 if you're paying cash. What a deal. So she said, she published this. And so you had a lot of people who were apologists for the crimes of the medical industry and the pharmaceutical industry. They came back and said, oh, these are just starting points for negotiation. Really? Is that the way this works out? That's not true at all, quite frankly. This is not the price that anybody pays. It's just a starting point for negotiating with insurers. Again, you have the Trump administration, version 1.0, during 2020 was paying these hospitals $13,000 to point a finger at somebody and say, they've got COVID. I know that's not a cold, that's not flu, that's COVID. Okay, $13,000. And now you get a 20% bonus on everything that you do for them in the hospital, right? And so now that aspirin that was $5, you get 20% bonus on that. So now it's $6. But most of the things are far more expensive than that. You put them on a ventilator. We'll give you $39,000 right now. So if you say they got COVID and you put them on a ventilator, that $50,000 ventilator, you just made $52,000. And then you get to charge them on a daily basis until you kill them. And then they'll give you a 20% bonus on that charge as well. And so this is one of those things where people didn't realize how much the hospitals were getting paid for these vaccines. But she said that Houston Methodist was an outlier even for this. Another Houston hospital, Houston Memorial Hermann, whose website shows that it charged $30 for COVID vaccines. They charged $6,000 for COVID vaccines. And again, it's not just that. They bribed everybody everywhere. You know, if they said that your loved one died of COVID, you believe that they killed them with a ventilator. But if you went along with the COVID diagnosis, they'd give you $9,000 for a funeral. But if you say they didn't die from COVID, then you don't get the $9,000 for the funeral. This is what Trump did. This is what this guy owned. And so as we look at this and we look at the other damage that's being done by Trump here, Americans are the ones paying for tariffs, says a study. We knew this all along. Americans, not foreigners, are bearing almost the entire cost of the U.S. tariffs, according to new research that contradicts a key claim from Trump. Conservatives have always known that you can't tax a business. If you raise corporate taxes, the corporation will pass it on to you in terms of prices, because if it's an expensive tax, they can't absorb it indefinitely. They may delay it, and that's what happens with the tariffs. They don't immediately pass it on because of competitive pressures. But eventually they have to pass it on because they cannot absorb those increased costs forever. And so Trump is out there bragging about this windfall amount of money that's been brought into the American coffers, and it's really coming out of the pocket of Americans. You like that tax increase? It's the biggest tax increase that we have ever had. If Trump is right, if he's got $600 billion worth of tariff tax increases, that's more than FDR did. FDR had the previous record, but if you adjust for the devaluation of the dollar, FDR's tax increase was $200 billion. Trump is 3 times as much as FDR. That's why I say he's a Democrat in every regard. He thinks that he can tax and spend our way to prosperity. That's always been the hallmark of the Democrat Party. Trump has repeatedly claimed that his historic tariffs, deployed aggressively over the past years, both a revenue raiser and a foreign policy tool, will be paid for by foreigners. Such assertions help to reinforce the president's bargaining power and encourage foreign governments to deal with the U.S. However, that is not true. This is a recent study, and we always knew that was not true. But again, in addition to that, there is the damage of the tantrums like we just saw with France and the 200% tariffs dropped on them overnight. Well, finally, we're seeing some traction for the understanding of what's going on with the national debt. As I pointed out yesterday, nobody else is really talking about it, but it's good to see that Drudge picked up the single article that I saw anywhere talking about the fact that Trump blew up the deficit by another $2 trillion last year. That was a story that was by Just the News. And now Drudge Report picked that up yesterday as well. Trump is going to unveil a plan allowing home buyers to use 401k funds for down payments. This is going to be an announcement at Davos, apparently. They need a little bit more time to work out the details because Trump makes these things up and nobody knows what he's doing. Trump will unveil a plan at Davos that would allow Americans to withdraw funds from their 401k for a house down payment. But again, this is moving the deck chairs on the Titanic. The real issue is affordability. Why are the houses less affordable? David Bahnsen, who I've interviewed in the past, he's a hedge fund manager, and he is the son of Greg Bahnsen, a Christian apologist that I have a great deal of respect for. But so I was always interested in talking to David. But what David had to say in terms of essays about this, he said it's really a supply problem. That's why the price is going up. And so all of these measures of saying, well, I'll let you use some of your savings over here for retirement to buy a house, or we're going to stop Blackstone from being able to buy single family homes. Well, I despise Blackstone and BlackRock, and don't confuse the two of those together. But that's not going to really solve anything. They have a very small footprint in the housing market, as David Bahnsen has pointed out. They've invested a lot in some of the worst markets, as a matter of fact. They've made some very bad decisions. But that's not what's driving the price of houses up. I don't want to see the houses owned only by them, but it's an affordability issue. And that's where it's going to go if you don't make them affordable. So let's fix the affordability issue. That's the way to stop it from becoming institutionalized, the single-family house being institutionalized, being owned by institutions, is to make it more affordable. And as he points out, it's the supply issue. And that's largely because of restrictions that the federal government has put in that makes it difficult and expensive to build homes. So get rid of some of those things. Get to the fundamental problem instead of just playing these financialized games that are out there. But that's the way that Trump is always going to play this. This is another one of these, phony solutions like inflation. As the Trump administration people are talking about it, Hassett is the guy who is the point man on this. He says, well, we're still talking about the mechanics of it. In other words, Trump has made this announcement. They don't really know what's going to happen with it. They're still working on the plan, but meanwhile, you should trust the plan, right? Same thing that Scott Bessent said about some of the credit card stuff. Well, we're still working on the contours of that. We don't really know what that is. This guy says, we're still working on the mechanics of it. In other words, they don't have any details. There's never a plan. What we see is Trump always shooting from the hip, or more accurately, shooting from the lip. And it's always reactionary. It's always vacillating because there is no plan to trust, folks. This garbage stuff, like a 50-year mortgage. On January the 7th, Trump announced that he's taking steps to bar large investors from purchasing more single-family homes. Again, this is a totally useless approach to the affordability issue. And the affordability issue is right at the feet of the federal government. We look at all this stuff with ICE, for example. I'm really not into, there's the argument from the left that there's no authority for ICE to exist. Well, that's not true. We have the Constitution, and the federal government has been delegated the authority to handle the border. The problem is the federal government didn't do that. The problem is the federal government incentivized illegal immigration with their illegal welfare state. Again, there's no constitutional authority for a welfare state from the federal government, funded by the national credit card. And so what you've had is both Democrats and Republicans stood by while they created this welfare magnet for illegal foreigners to come here. And then when it comes to the border, take a look at what Trump did in his first term. He had a lot of talk about patrolling the border, a lot of talk about a wall and everything. And immediately when he comes in, immigration basically stopped for about 6 months. Then everybody realized he was all talk, no action, a paper tiger. Then we had the caravans. Remember those? That was a Trump administration phenomenon that happened because he did nothing at all about it. And then, of course, the Democrats have poured gasoline on the fire of the open border. They deserve a lot of blame for all this stuff. But again, the Republicans sat by and did nothing, except they would use the Democrats' desire for an open border, their desire for a great replacement. They would use that to get people to vote for them and then do nothing about it. So let me just say that when it comes to immigration control and when it comes to ICE, don't talk to me about government-created problems like an open border, and then a government solution that is authoritarian, like ICE, the way they're being conducted now. And again, that's the way they always do this. They create the problem, they come up with a solution that is horrible. And that is the way they roll with all this stuff. So since the start of the coronavirus pandemic, housing costs have rocketed, with the median home prices rising 55%, and rents surging more than 35% nationwide. Again, Trump laid the foundation for this with the so-called pandemic. And he did it for the 2030 globalists that he's going to be talking to at Davos. He did it right after he talked at Davos 6 years ago, right? He comes back from Davos where everybody, oh, look at this, he really told off those globalists. Then he comes back and he enacts all of their desires as he's talking against them. What a hypocrite. So again, the typical age of the first-time home buyers climbed to 40 years old in 2025, the highest on record. It was 31 in 2014. And so we see that housing costs have gone up by 55%, rent costs have gone up by 35% nationwide. Thank you, Trump. That was a key part of what happened, key outcome of this fake pandemic. So, again, the trying to stop institutional investors, it's a tiny part of the market. I don't like these guys, but they're villains, but they're not the villain in this particular problem. Speaking of villains, let's take a look at what is happening with Germany here. This is an amazing story. You had Lexus, which is a Toyota brand, has a remote start, and they did it, put it on the cars to allow people in Germany, where it's very cold, to start the car up and de-ice it before they get out there. And so the government saw this happening and said, you can't do that. You're going to be putting out exhaust and CO2 in the atmosphere. So they forced Toyota to do an over-the-air update to deactivate remote start. Isn't that amazing? As somebody pointed out, they can't tell the difference between a building and a car. Say that you can heat the building, but you can't heat the car. It's this irrational fear of CO2 and the MacGuffin mandates that they use for this. And take a look at how cold it is everywhere. Again, we're going to appeal to weather, but we haven't seen any climate change. We see these variations. Sometimes we have things are cold, sometimes they're hot. That's called weather. Over a long period of time, it's called climate. And we haven't seen the climate change. We see the weather change all the time, and both sides will use it for their own purposes. But there has not been a long-term increase. And even if you believe that was a long-term increase, you need to prove that it's due to CO2 and the mechanisms that they say. They look the other way when it has to do with what they want, just like they look the other way if somebody is heating a building, but you can't heat your car. As a matter of fact, they've made exemptions for electric vehicles. They can do cabin heating before you get into the car, but they won't allow that for an internal combustion engine. It's just idiotic, but it is also tyrannical. And then take a look at what is happening in China. AI-powered robocops. This is not taking very long, is it? And again, they are in a beta test in China. But remember that China is a beta test for tyranny and global governance and the technocracy. They are the beta test for the world. And so this really is, I guess we could say this is an alpha test for what we want to do here. Remember when I put this together, Trump bragging about what he's going to do in Chicago, he puts up a thing called Chikopolypse. Remember that? He had himself dressed up AI like the Robert Duvall character from Apocalypse Now. And I put in some clips there of the RoboCops and how I believe they're going to be used, it didn't take very long to see exactly what I had this RoboCop do in the video. Grab the gun and point it right, point blank in somebody's face. This just happened with ICE. I don't know if you've seen the video or not, but you had a situation with a bunch of ICE guys lined up, and there was a woman who was yelling at these guys as a protester, but she wasn't doing anything violent. And she's standing there yelling at him, and he's got one of these pepper ball guns. He puts that down and he pulls out his real pistol, and he sticks it right in her face, just like this robot does in this video.
Very unsafe places, and we're going to straighten them out one by one. They're saying you're trying to take over the republic, and this is going to be a major part for some of the people in this room. That's a war too. It's a war from within. I told Pete we should use some of these dangerous cities as training grounds for our military.
That's what their military is going to look like. This next clip here, right there. Yeah. Stick the gun in that guy's face. Stick it in your face. And then shove somebody. Shove me back. Go ahead. Orwell said the future was a boot stomping on your face forever. He didn't mention that it'd be a robotic boot. Let's burn that Constitution. We don't need that anymore, right? Well, the way this is working out right now in China, do you have the picture there, Travis, you can show people? This is, their robot looks very feminine, actually, I think. It almost looks like it's got a mask on because it's white. So again, disguised to look female, and I guess a girl boss, a nanny, and that's the way they're using this. Again, it's like a meter-maid crossing guard combination. For your safety, please ride bicycles in the non-motorized lane. It yells at people from its pedestal. Yeah, it's how it always begins, isn't it? These nagging safety net Nazis and nannies, and then barking orders at us, and then it escalates from that point. The warning came, however, not from a human traffic officer, but from a humanoid robot standing upright on a safety island. It said its metallic sleekness and futuristic demeanor have made it a local celebrity, with pedestrians frequently pausing to snap photos of the scene. Yeah, we love our tyranny that's coming, don't we? It's so fascinating. The robot uses large language model algorithms to autonomously identify traffic violations by non-motorized vehicles and pedestrians, and to deliver on-site warnings. And again, this is the way it's going to go. Soon they'll be ticketing everybody, either using automated license plate readers or using facial recognition. They'll be ticketing you. And as they point out, it's expected to ease the workload of the police. When we were in China, you've heard Joel Salenti talk about how great the trains are in China. Well, some of them are. We went from Guangzhou to Hong Kong, two major cities. That train was really, really nice, very modern, and pretty amazing how smooth and how fast it was. But traveling internally in the country, going from a different location to a small town, a relatively small town. I mean, it had a bigger population than New York, but for China, it was a small town, Nanning. And when we took that train, that was a mess. And the train station was so dangerous that I didn't want to fly. I didn't want to put the family on a small plane in China. I just didn't trust them. So I insisted that we take a train. And I didn't realize how much of a problem it was going to be for the adoption agency. They specialized in Chinese adoptions, but they didn't have people insist on trains usually. And they had somebody buy a ticket to take the same train that we were doing, just so they could personally escort us through this dangerous area. It was so dangerous. And we went through the area, and they had a blue and white building that was barking orders. And I asked the guy, I said, what's that about? And it was really desperate. And it looked like it was an official building. And he said, well, that's the police recording that's there. He said the police are afraid to come here. It's a no-go zone for the police because it's so dangerous. And so that is a recorded message telling them how many people robbed and killed here last week. And it was pretty interesting. You know, when we went through, we were definitely noticed. We stuck out like a sore thumb. Everybody that's there is about the same height and has the same hair color. And we were all over the place, you know, Travis with his red hair and Lance with his brown hair and Karen with her blonde hair and me with my gray beard and everything. So everybody was really staring at us. I was hoping that it was simply because they thought we were bizarre looking and they'd never seen anything like that before. But again, it'll take the workload from the police. I can see them using these robocops in a scenario like that. The robot is mobile. It's capable of navigating independently to designated locations on command. Its capabilities also include identifying illegal parking, it's a meter maid, and conducting real-time road monitoring. There's a surveillance thing to write tickets and that type of thing. You can easily see this being used in the United States. Last year, several Chinese cities began integrating robotic officers into daily policing. In Sichuan province, they deployed a team of robot police officers, including quadruped robots, wheeled robots, and humanoid robots to patrol the streets alongside their human counterparts. But there they were patrolling with humans. And you know, we've shown you the pictures of that. They had one robot that was like a mechanical ball. I said it reminds me more and more of Patrick McGowan's The Village, right? They might as well call this thing Rover. So AI, except it was rigid. AI-powered traffic policing robot was put on duty in Hangzhou in eastern China. Only by bringing products into real-life scenarios and collecting real operational data can we achieve rapid iteration, said the manager of the company that's manufacturing this particular one. Again, it's the beta test, and China is the beta test for the dystopian world that they want to build. And when you look at what is happening with the federalization of the police and removing any and all restrictions for them, you know, so-called quote-unquote law enforcement that doesn't have to obey any laws because they have absolute immunity from any crimes that they might commit. You know, the human robots that we see, that's what they're looking for. They're looking for a lot of human robots. They'll soon be replaced by armies of robo-bosses and also by robo-nannies, and they'll be using deadly force. So we have a giant replica of the Trump-Epstein birthday card made an appearance on the National Mall. This is by the same group that had previously put up a statue of Trump and Jeffrey Epstein shaking hands. That lasted only a day, and then the National Park Service took that down. So I don't know if the card is even still there. It was put up yesterday because yesterday was actually today is the birthday of Jeffrey Epstein. And it was that birthday card that had the crudely drawn profile of a woman and Trump's signature at the bottom of it. That was on Jeffrey Epstein's 50th birthday. And that was 22 years ago, I think. Yeah, 22 years ago. So he'd be 72 today. But that's how long Trump has known this guy. As a matter of fact, there was a joke about how do we get Trump to stop talking about Greenland? Well, we have Denmark rename it Epstein Island. That's how we can get him to never talk about it again. And so that was... maybe that was why Trump was raging overnight, because they put this card up. I don't know. I'm sure he'll get it taken down. And the group is called, by the way, it is called the Secret Handshake. That's what they call themselves, the people who are trolling Trump over the Epstein issue. It's a very large copy of the letter that was sent by Trump to Epstein on the pedophile's 50th birthday. Trump has claimed that it is a fake. Said it's a hoax, you know, just like all the Epstein stuff is supposedly a hoax. Well, it says, we have certain things in common, Jeffrey, said Trump on the card. And he had a little dialogue going back and forth between the two of them. And then on the Trump's card, Epstein says, yes, we do, come to think of it. Trump says, enigmas never age. Have you noticed that? And then the letter closes with the line, "A pal is a wonderful thing. Happy birthday, and may every day be another wonderful secret." And, of course, now this is all a national security secret. We're not allowed to know about it. It's all redacted. And so he called it a fabrication. He sued the Wall Street Journal for $10 billion. But then the actual document itself was released by Congress shortly after he filed the suit, but he's going to continue on with that. Meanwhile, you have a BBC radio host frantically shuts down a caller who said that Trump is a pedophile. So I guess they're worried about another $10 billion. That seems to be the figure that Trump likes to throw out. He's sued the Wall Street Journal $10 billion for showing the card, and that was later released by Congress. That is a real card. And so he also sued BBC for $10 billion as well. So it started out with the caller saying, "Starmer needs to stand up and give Trump the V and wave our flag," said the caller. "We can't keep cooperating with this guy. We gave him too many warnings. We've given him too many. Maybe this, maybe that. And, you know, it's bad when Farage is going after it. This is the worst government I've ever seen in my life," he said. And then he continued. He said, "The people of Greenland, they've got their own sovereignty. The whole world is watching this and thinking, what is he doing? Putin is probably looking at Trump thinking, even I wouldn't do this. The whole thing is just an absolute mess, and I can't believe it," he said. BBC host was Nikki Campbell. He asked what the caller thought about Trump's claim to Greenland, and he said, "What claim? It's ridiculous. I just cannot, I don't use this word lightly. He's a pedophile. He's a narcissist. Oh, no, hang on." And they cut him off. "I just can't have that. I don't use this word lightly," he said. "We can't have that accusation." And he cut off the caller. Again, he doesn't want to get another $10 billion lawsuit. Jeffrey Epstein's crimes loom large in Britain. When you consider what the man formerly known as Prince, what happened to him, Prince Andrew, and his connections and his length of friendship that he had with Epstein, nowhere close to what Trump had. And I've pointed out this before. You know, the royal family knows just how damaging that association with Jeffrey Epstein is. And of course, Trump does as well. It's one of the reasons why he's trying to cover this up. But that's why the royal family booted him out, took his titles and everything else. And yet, Prince Andrew, or the man formerly known as Prince, had less of a connection to Epstein than Donald Trump did. You can certainly understand why they would think that Trump is a pedophile. I mean, they know that about Prince Andrew. And so now Trump is hit by new allegations, this time of blatant corruption, selling pardons. And remember, I've had John Kiriakou on for a couple of times talking about how Rudy Giuliani offered to get him a pardon and for $1 million. He said he met with Rudy Giuliani and the other guys because, you know, he's trying to get a pardon. And he said, there's two guys and Rudy Giuliani. And so he said, you know, what do I need to do to get a pardon? And he's done his time he went to jail because of the wars about, the lies about weapons of mass destruction that were used to start the Iraq War. He didn't tell those lies. He told the truth. He told the truth that the lies were based on torture that the CIA had done. And the person who covered up the torture and the person who sold the lies about weapons of mass destruction was Gina Haspel. And she was rewarded with being made the director of the CIA under Trump's first administration. And you look at everybody else. None of the people who did the torture were punished. There was an attempt at a civil lawsuit against the psychiatrists who had devised the tortures, and even that was shut down. So the only person who went to jail was a person who exposed how these people produced the lies that lied us into the Iraq War. And so anyway, they sent John Kiriakou to prison. I forget the amount of time that he was sent to prison for, but he did the time and he got out. And because he was convicted of the felony, he didn't get his pension from the CIA. And that's why he wanted a pardon. If he got a pardon, then he would be able to get the pension. The pension, as he pointed out, was only worth $750,000. So he wasn't going to pay $1 million to get a $750,000 pension. And so he's talking to Rudy and two other people, and he's told this story multiple times. And he's told it twice on this show. And he said, he starts to mention the pardon, and Rudy says, oh, I got to get, and so he gets up and goes to the bathroom and excuses himself. And the other two guys said, it'll cost you $1 million. And he said, I'm not going to pay that. And so that's, and he's told that story several times. Well, it turns out that these pardons that Trump did on Friday are, people are questioning the connections. It looks like he has sold these pardons in exchange for donations to MAGA allies. And so the central part of this is he rewarded generous donors with clemency. For example, a pardon shopping industry is now being uncovered where lobbyists say that the going rate is $1 million. Boy, hasn't changed from the first Trump administration, has it? Pardon seekers have offered some lobbyists close to the president success fees of as much as $6 million if they can get a deal. And the example is Julio Herrera Bolotini, a Venezuelan-Italian banker who is facing felony bribery and other charges. Recent donations from his daughter, Isabella Herrera, who donated $2.5 million to MAGA Incorporated. In exchange for the move, Herrera agreed to plead guilty to a misdemeanor campaign finance charge, disappointing career prosecutors who had pushed for a harsher sentence. But it gets more interesting. 2 months later, Isabella Herrera donated another $1 million to MAGA Incorporated, culminating in a pardon from Trump late last week. The White House claimed the political contributions do not lead to the pardon. In other words, it's just a, excuse me, just a timely coincidence, right? So on Friday, Trump also pardoned former Puerto Rico Governor Wanda Garced. Garced had pleaded guilty to a corruption charge related to her 2020 campaign. The scandal also included campaign contributions from this other guy, Julio Herrera Bolotini. It's a little network, isn't it, that he's got going. And, when we look at this, again, Trump has talked about how his people are so loyal to him.
They have to get the shot. The vaccinations are so important. This is really going around now. They have to get their shots.
Yeah, they have to get their shots. And, he could shoot people himself. It could be with a gun on Fifth Avenue. Or it could be the other shots, and nobody's going to hold it against him.
My people are so smart. And you know what else they say about my people? The polls. They say, I have the most loyal people. Did you ever see that? Where I could stand in the middle of Fifth Avenue and shoot somebody, and I wouldn't lose any voters, okay? It's like incredible.
He could also produce the vaccine that killed millions worldwide. Some of them right away, some of them with turbo cancer. And his people could identify that this is bad. It's a bad shot, but they won't connect it to him. They'll look the other way because his people really don't care. Travis, while I'm trying to get my voice back, can you cover some of the comments there?
You got it. We have Bin Laden Bernanke 1 says, Trump is like the guy in the video Bittersweet Symphony. I'm a million different people from one day to the next. His presidency is bittersweet on its best days.
Yeah. That's right.
And then we have Sabbath, 1974, says intel agencies cover up pedophilia under guise of national security because Congress, senators, and presidents are implicated. The CIA would never let Epstein become a household name if ARC inciting him were optional.
That's right. We're going to take a quick break, folks. We'll be right back on trying to get my voice back here. We'll talk about Don Lemon, who finally went to church, but for all the wrong reasons and doing all the wrong things. We'll be right back.
listening to The David Knight Show.
Well, over the weekend, we had Don Lemon and a disruption of a church service, which I don't agree with. And again, Don Lemon is being criticized even by the left for his imbecility. He thinks that what they did was actually the First Amendment, completely ignoring the First Amendment rights of people to have the free expression of religion and the fact that it is private property. But there was an interesting op-ed piece in World from a guy who helped to start the church in St. Paul that they interrupted. And it's also a church plant from Doug Wilson's group in Moscow, Idaho, where they have a church plant in Washington, D.C., and he's involved in that church. And he said they have on a regular basis there are people who are protesting War Pete, and because he attends that church, and because War Pete attends the church, they have people outside who are yelling at him and screaming about the lawless murders that War Pete is doing. And it's like, I look at, and I've said this before about the people at the Moscow church and, the Christian church in Moscow, Idaho, and Doug Wilson. I said, you need to do some church discipline and some explaining to this guy who's out there openly lying about stuff, violating God's law, violating moral law, violating the Constitution, violating international law, and boasting about it. That's the problem with War Pete. But having said all that, I don't agree with what these people are doing in Minnesota. In Minnesota, the issue is that there's a guy that's part of the staff there that also works for ICE. So what they did was, as he describes it, a disruption that was planned and coordinated. Agitators sat through the first part of the service before standing and chanting accusations at the pastors and members. The agitators proudly filmed and posted themselves screaming at children, harassing churchgoers, demanding that they denounce ICE, and accusing them of being fake Christians for not standing with their Latino and Somali neighbors. Again, we have to understand how to divide this thing. The federal government has been delegated the power to do immigration control. There's no question about that. There's no question the fact that these people have violated the law. There's also no question about the fact that the ICE agents are out of control, a lawless mob that is creating another set of problems. And so I don't defend either one of these mobs, and it is amazing to see people defending one or the other. He says, first we ought to pray that our government officials would uphold law and order. And I would start with War Pete instead of the lawless, quote-unquote, law enforcement and the disorder of ICE. And maybe if you want to have law and order, maybe you should tell War Pete not to kill people without due process for crimes that are not capital offenses, and not to circle back and murder survivors of your initial attack. And so he said, this includes praying for ICE as they carry out their lawful mission. Yes, there's no question. Their mission is lawful, but maybe the means are unlawful. Maybe what they're doing is shameful. Maybe they should follow the law and get a warrant so they know who they're arresting. You know, we just had a situation where they had a guy who was originally from an area of China, the Hmong people. And they were under a lot of Chinese persecution because a lot of them had helped the CIA in Vietnam. So this is a guy, and there's a lot of people in Minnesota who have immigrated from the Hmong community. And this guy has been here for decades and was a citizen. And he came here legally, and he did everything right. The ICE agents showed up at his house, drug him out in the snow without any adequate clothing. He had Crocs or flip-flops on, and he had shorts on. They put him in the car, drove him around for an hour, figured out that he was an American citizen finally, and just came back and dumped him. None of that would have happened if you would have gotten a warrant and followed the law. You lawless mob, don't call yourself law enforcement if you think that you've got absolute immunity from the law. It's the kind of hypocrisy is what is creating this issue here. But then it gets even worse. I'm going to keep going for just a little bit. I want to say this before we stop. What is even worse is now you have Christians who are out there demanding that the FACE Act be used against Don Lemon. Well, yeah, he should have some penalties for what he did, but why would we support something like the FACE Act? Do they not know what the FACE Act was? In the early 1990s, It was set up to protect abortion clinics. You know, we looked during the Biden administration how they weaponized the FACE Act against people who had not even violated the FACE Act. But the FACE Act has been used to arrest grandmothers who are praying silently to get people to not have an abortion. It's been used against a father who was at a safe distance away from it and was shoved and attacked by one of the people in the abortion clinic. It's been abused so much. And I think it's kind of interesting. If you go back and look at the FACE Act, the FACE Act was first and foremost about protecting as abortion clinic access, right? Is really what part of the name of the FACE Act was. It was all about protecting abortion clinics. But they threw a clause in there and say, but you can't do this to churches either. Why would they do that? Those two things are completely unrelated. There was no protests, nobody standing outside of churches protesting the policies or anything like that at the time. They did that to get complicity from these people. And so now the conservatives, rather than calling for the repeal of the FACE Act, they want the FACE Act to be weaponized against their enemies. Isn't this the ultimate strategy of what Trump is teaching us? You see something evil and you don't want to end it. You want to take it over and use it for your own purposes. This Boromir administration, and that cancer has metastasized throughout. Now, it turns out that the DOJ decided not to use the FACE Act against Don Lemon. Instead, they charged him with the, I think it's 1871 Act, or maybe 1877 Act, the Ku Klux Klan Act. This is something that goes back to Reconstruction. And it was a federal law that they had there. And they have charged Don Lemon under that law. He gets charged with the KKK Act. He gets charged on Martin Luther King Day. That's the headline that one organization had. But anyway, you know, we look at this, and there are remedies that are there without going to war, this kind of extreme, and without doubling down and enforcing something like the FACE Act. That's all I had to say. So we'll take a break now. Thank you so much, Travis, for giving me a couple extra minutes to talk about that. Have a good day. Thank you. The common man. They created Common Core to dumb down our children. They created Common Pass to track and control us. Their Commons Project to make sure the commoners own nothing. And the communist future. They see the common man as simple, unsophisticated, ordinary. But each of us has worth and dignity created in the image of God. That is what we have in common. That is what they want to take away. Their most powerful weapons are isolation, deception, intimidation. They desire to know everything about us while they hide everything from us. It's time to turn that around and expose what they want to hide. Please share the information and links you'll find at thedavidknightshow.com. Thank you for listening. Thank you for sharing. If you can't support us financially, please keep us in your prayers. thedavidknightshow.com.